Good morning. In the Christian calendar, it is Easter Sunday, the day we celebrate that Christ is risen. Across the world today, although many Christians may not be able to gather in person together, but over videos, over phone calls, over the internet, there will be a phrase that is said that is a part of the Christian tradition. On Easter Sunday, the worship leader says, "Christ is risen." And everyone responds, "He is risen indeed." And so this morning, as the sun is rising, I want to say, Christ is risen. He is risen indeed. Author Frederick Buechner once said, "Here's the world. Terrible and beautiful things will happen. Do not be afraid." When I think back on Good Friday, I think of the terrible things that happen in our world and Jesus sharing in those terrible things. But when I think of this morning, I am reminded of the beauty. I'm reminded of the beautiful thing that is Jesus rising from the dead. But how do we not be afraid? Here is the world, terrible and beautiful things will happen. Do not be afraid. This morning, this Easter morning, is why I believe we do not have to be afraid. Even when facing death, even when facing uncertainties, even when facing incredible grief, we do not have to grieve as those without hope if we believe in the hope of Easter morning. You know, as I've been thinking about this morning, I always think about that early, right when it's still dark moment when Mary and several of the women arrive at the tomb and they discover that the stone has been rolled away and it's empty. And as some of the followers go inside the tomb, they discover the clothes that Jesus has been buried in, these strips of linen, are there, but they're just lying there, even folded up there in the tomb. And I think of that moment that's described in the book of John in chapter 20. And it reminds me of another story in the book of John, but found in chapter 11. You see, in the Bible, we actually have two accounts of someone raising from the dead after they had been buried. Yes, the most well-known one is Jesus, who we celebrate today. But another is Lazarus. Lazarus was a friend of Jesus and he had died. And Jesus wept when he heard the news of his friend dying. And he had been in the tomb for 4 days. And Jesus goes to the tomb and he kind of looks at the people and says, like, "Hey, you don't have to be afraid." And he asks the people to roll the stone away. And he says, "Lazarus, get up." And I mean, I'm sure the people thought, that's crazy. It's gonna smell bad. There's been a dead body in there, and get up, he's dead. But Lazarus does get up. But this time the clothes that Lazarus has been buried in, those strips of linen, are still confining him. He's still wrapped up. And so Jesus turns to the people around him that are witnessing this incredible miracle. And he says, take off his grave clothes. Help him get those strips of linen off. He's alive. And I think of the contrast between Jesus and Lazarus. Yes, they both raised from the dead, but Lazarus needed help. Lazarus needed others to roll the stone away. Lazarus needed Jesus' words saying, "Get up. Come out of the grave." And Lazarus needed the help of others to take off those linen strips, to take off the grave clothes. It's not the same for Jesus. The stone is rolled away. God's miraculous power rolls the stone away. Jesus is able to remove his own grave clothes because as God who has become human, he doesn't need that help. He's conquered death. He is risen from the dead. Well, each and every one of us, I believe, have remnants of death on us. We have grave clothes. We have things like fear and greed and anxiety and lust and all of these things that wrap us up and confine us. And Jesus wants us and invites us and beckons us to come out of the grave, to step away from those things, to see the sun rise in our life into a new life, in a new way of being human. And we are all invited to that new life. But we can't do it on our own. We need the help of the only one who could do it on his own. We need Jesus. We also need the help of others. We need others showing us, how do we take these grave clothes off? We need others coming and assisting us with taking off the things that have kept us bound. And so this morning, as we say, Christ is risen, and as we repeat, he is risen indeed, the question we all have to be asking ourselves is, have I risen? Have I risen indeed? Have I taken off the grave clothes to put on a new life, to put on the Spirit of God, of love and joy and peace and patience and kindness and goodness and gentleness, to take off the fear, to take off the death, the sickness, the illness that is all around us, and to put on a new life? That is the invitation of Easter. That is our invitation this morning and every day. So together, let's take off these grave clothes, because Christ is risen, and so have we.